All right, so today we're going to be taking a look at something that I think a lot of people are, thinking about in 2025, especially in light of some of the, potential changes in policies and stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about alternatives to mainstream American IT tools.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're going to be looking specifically at some open source and self-hosted options.
Right.
And we're going to kind of go across all these different categories, from your operating system all the way up to things like, social media and e-commerce.
Yeah, exactly. Like the whole suite. The
whole thing, yeah. And, this is something that that's been highlighted in some of the material we've been looking at.
Yeah.
Textcole, and an article called 11 Logiciels Incontournables from Le Podcast de Philippe.
Yeah, that was a great article. Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. And by the way, speaking of Le Podcast de Philippe, they're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube today.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
If you're enjoying this kind of content, why not head over there and give them a sub?
Definitely support the creators.
Absolutely. All right, so let's
dive in.
Let's dive into it.
Yeah.
And I guess the first question is why are we even talking about this?
Yeah.
Why is this relevant right now?
Well, I think, there's been a lot of talk about, potential policy shifts and stuff, especially under the Trump administration. And I think a lot of people are kind of, looking for a little bit more control over their data and their, their digital lives. Yeah. And so, open source and self-hosted options can kind of provide that.
Right. They give you a little more agency in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's start with the most basic thing, I guess the foundation of your digital life.
Okay.
The operating system.
Right.
Most people are using Windows or Mac OS.
Sure.
But there's this whole other world out there called Linux.
Absolutely.
And it's got all these different flavors or distributions, as they call them.
Yeah, distributions, yeah.
So we're talking about things like Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, Debian. There's a whole bunch of them.
There's a ton.
So for someone who's never even heard of Linux before,
sure,
what is the main appeal here? Why would you even consider switching?
So I think the main appeal for Linux is really the control and the transparency that it offers.
Okay.
Because it's open source.
Right.
You have this whole global community of developers who are constantly scrutinizing the code, improving it.
So you're not just beholden to one company who's making all the decisions.
Exactly. And you also have this incredible flexibility to tailor the system to exactly what you need.
All right. So it's very customizable.
Very customizable, yeah.
Okay, cool. And what about for our phones? We're all glued to our phones these days.
Yeah.
But, the default options often come with a lot of pre-installed services that we may not want. What are some alternatives out there?
So on the mobile front, some really interesting projects are GrapheneOS and CalyxOS. They basically take the open source Android base and they strip away all the Google services and replace them with privacy-respecting alternatives.
Okay.
GrapheneOS in particular is known for its very strong focus on security hardening.
So it's they took Android and they locked it down.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so that's the operating system side of things. But then there's also the question of where we keep all of our digital stuff.
Right, our files.
Our files.
Yeah.
Most people are using Google Drive or Dropbox or OneDrive. Those are all very convenient.
They are.
But what if you want more direct control over your storage?
Well, that's where the self-hosted route comes in.
Okay.
So you have tools like Nextcloud and C-File.
Okay.
These allow you to actually run your own cloud server.
So it's like having your own personal Dropbox.
Exactly.
Right.
And you manage the storage, the security, everything.
Yeah, and that's all running on hardware that you own.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's totally under your control.
Wow, that's cool. And then there's also Syncthing, right?
Yes, Syncthing is fantastic.
Which is a little different.
It is.
It's more about direct device-to-device syncing.
Yeah, peer-to-peer.
Yeah, so you don't even need a central cloud.
You don't even need a cloud.
Wow. Okay, that's cool. So we've got our operating system, we've got our storage, but then we also need to be able to work on documents and collaborate with people.
Of course, yeah.
And, a lot of people are using Microsoft Office or Google Docs for that.
Sure.
Are there any open source alternatives in that space?
Absolutely. So for just a straight up desktop Office suite, you have LibreOffice, which is a very mature and very comprehensive open source Office suite.
So it can handle pretty much anything you throw at it.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, cool. And then for online collaboration, you mentioned a few things.
Yeah.
Right? OnlyOffice, Collabora. How do those compare to something like Google Docs?
So OnlyOffice and Collabora, they offer very similar features to Google Docs.
Okay.
But the key difference is that they can be self-hosted.
Okay, so again, you have that control over where your data is.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And then there was another one, you mentioned CryptPad.
Yes, CryptPad is really interesting.
What's special about that one?
So CryptPad takes it a step further, and it offers end-to-end encryption, which is really crucial if you're collaborating on sensitive documents.
So like even the people who are running the server can't see what you're working on.
Exactly.
Wow, that's cool. And then we also have Etherpad and HedgeDoc.
Right. Those are also great options.
Okay, and those are more for like real-time collaborative editing.
Exactly. Yeah, like if you need to work on something together simultaneously.
Right. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we've covered operating system, storage, document editing. Now let's talk about how we stay in touch with each other.
Right. Communication.
Communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most people are using things like WhatsApp or Slack or Discord. Are there any alternatives that give you more control or just to operate on a different model?
Yeah. So one really strong contender is Element, which is built on the Open Matrix protocol.
Okay.
And it's decentralized, meaning that the conversations aren't tied to a single company's servers. So it offers more resilience and more control.
Interesting. Okay. And then what about XMPP?
XMPP, yeah, that's an older protocol, but it's still very capable.
Okay.
And it's also decentralized.
Okay.
And there are some really nice clients for it, like Conversations.
All right, cool. And then for video conferencing, you know, a lot of people are using Zoom or Google Meet. What's a good open source alternative to those?
Jitsi Meet is a really solid open source alternative.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Signal.
Right. Signal is kind of the gold standard for secure and private messaging.
Yeah, and it's easy to use, too.
Yeah, it's very user-friendly.
And then for voice chat, you mentioned Mumble.
Yeah, Mumble is great for low-latency voice chat.
Okay.
So it's often used by gamers.
Okay, so if you're like playing a game online and you need to be able to talk to your teammates.
Yeah, Mumble is perfect for that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it seems like a lot of these alternatives are focusing on decentralization.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is interesting. It's like a different way of structuring these essential services.
It is, yeah. It's like moving away from this client-server model to something that's more peer-to-peer.
Yeah, more distributed.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we talked about communication now. Let's talk about how we browse the web. You know, Chrome is obviously the dominant browser these days.
It is, yeah.
But are there any good alternatives out there?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you have Firefox, which is a long-standing open source browser with a very strong focus on user privacy.
Okay.
And then you have Brave, which is another popular choice that blocks trackers and offers a built-in cryptocurrency wallet.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting. And then for people who are really prioritizing anonymity, you have the Tor browser.
Right, sure, sorry for that.
Which routes your traffic through this whole network of relays.
Exactly.
So it's very difficult to trace.
Very difficult.
Okay, cool. And then what about search? You know, everyone's using Google.
Yeah.
Are there any good alternatives to Google search?
Yeah, there are actually quite a few. So you have SearXNG, Google, Kagi, Mojeek.
Okay.
They all offer different approaches to indexing and privacy.
Okay.
SearXNG in particular is interesting because it can be self-hosted.
Oh, cool. So you can actually run your own search engine.
You can, yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's cool. So we've got browsing, we've got search. Let's talk about email.
Okay.
Gmail and Outlook are kind of the big players there.
Yeah.
Are there any good alternatives to those?
Yeah, definitely. So for an email client, you have Thunderbird.
Okay.
Which is a very powerful open source email client that can manage multiple accounts.
Okay, cool. And then for encrypted email services, there are a few options you mentioned.
Yeah, so you have ProtonMail, Tuda, and Mailbox.org.
Okay.
Those are all excellent choices if you want to keep your inbox private. Okay,
cool. And then you also mentioned the possibility of self-hosting your own email server.
Yeah, if you're technically inclined, you can use solutions like MailCow or Post.io.
Okay.
And that gives you like ultimate control over your email infrastructure.
Wow. Okay, so it's like taking self-hosting to the next level.
It is, yeah.
All right, cool. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
You know, from the operating system all the way up to email. And it seems like there's this whole ecosystem of alternatives out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that can really give people more choice and more control over their digital lives.
Exactly.
And I think that's really important, especially in the current climate.
Yeah.
With all the concerns about privacy and data security, it's good to know that we have options. Yeah, it is.
So I guess the question is, like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Are these alternatives going to become more mainstream?
I think they have to.
Yeah.
I think people are becoming more and more aware of the importance of privacy.
Right.
And I think they're looking for alternatives.
Yeah.
And so I think as these tools continue to mature and become more user-friendly,
right,
I think we'll see even greater adoption.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, cool. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot.
Me too.
And hopefully our listeners have as well.
They hope so.
And again, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, be sure to check out Podcast If You Leap on YouTube.
Yeah, they're doing great work.
They are, yeah. And they're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers today.
Awesome.
So go give them a sub. That's all for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me.
It was fun.
All right, take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
And now for something completely different.
Oh, okay.
So we've talked about all these amazing alternatives.
Yeah.
Giving us more control, more privacy. But I guess the question is, like, what does the future hold?
Right.
What's the end game here?
Yeah.
Is it just about having more options?
I think it's more than that.
Okay.
I think it's about fundamentally changing the way we interact with technology.
Okay.
Moving away from these centralized platforms that control all of our data, and moving towards something that's more decentralized, more peer-to-peer.
More equitable.
More equitable, exactly. Okay. I think it's about building a more democratic and more resilient internet.
Wow, that's a big vision.
It is.
But I think it's a good one.
I do too.
And I think it's something worth fighting for.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I guess the question for our listeners is, like, what does the future of personal and organizational technology independence look like to you?
That's a great question.
What are the factors that are going to drive wider adoption of these tools?
Yeah.
I think that's something worth thinking about.
Definitely.
All right. So on that note, we're going to wrap things up.
Okay.
Thanks again for listening to this deep dive.
Thank you.
And we'll catch you next time.